Hi everyone, it's Ross Anderson here from the Australia and New Zealand Boutique Wine Show, and this is episode number 1 of Meet the Boutique Winemakers, and it's the trophy edition. We ran the Australian and New Zealand Boutique Wine Show 2 weeks ago, and it's been non-stop chaos, but good chaos ever since, with generating the results, sending all the bits and pieces out to the various winemakers of Australia and New Zealand, and of course communicating with the trophy winners. And we have one of the major trophy winners joining us today, and it's ironic that it's our first show, and we'll have the numero uno wine personality and vineyard joining us. The Boutique Wine Show is celebrating 25 years this year of supporting the small winemakers of Australia and New Zealand. And as always with these video interviews, we aim to inform, educate, and entertain you on all things boutique, and share the stories and the personalities behind the brands, which are the heartbeat of Australia and New Zealand wine. Now, on to what nearly didn't happen this year with all the issues that we've faced through the COVID crisis. This show is generally run around about the August-September time, but we made a decision around about April-May that we would proceed, but we would push the show to the very end of the year. So we ran it in November for the very first time, and we had an amazing response. And we are delighted with the set of results. And joining us, accordingly, joining us live from Hobart, I'm just going to patch him in here, is Mr. Fred Peacock from Bream Creek Estate in beautiful Tasmania. Good morning, Fred, and welcome.
Morning, Ross.
How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. We're very happy with the season so far, so feeling pretty good. Yeah.
Excellent. So we've had lots of communication, you, myself, and Rafe over the last 2 weeks. Bream Creek did exceedingly well this year and stole the major prize away from our beloved and very close friends at Home Hill, who I believe are good friends of yourselves. And I was just saying to you a few minutes ago that this bad boy over here, the Wine of Show Trophy, which has various winners, but it's got Home Hill, and Home Hill, who did the trifecta. We've got a new entry over here this year, and it's going to be Bream Creek. Bream Creek, let's grab the bottle while we're there. We'll talk about this in a minute, but the Bream Creek Reserve Pinot Noir 2017 has taken out the Wine of Show, it's taken out the Red Wine of Show, and it's taken out the trophy in the Pinot Noir class. Generally the things that Home Hill would do. So I'm giving you plenty of ammunition there, Fred, and I hope you enjoy using that accordingly. But yes, congratulations, firstly, on the massive achievement. Bream Creek entered 6 wines into the 2020 ANZ Boutique Wine Show. 5 of those 6 wines medalled, and we'll be talking about them through the episode. But what I'd really love to know is how are things down in Tassie, and what impact did the lockdown have, and did anything change in your daily operations?
The lockdown was pretty severe in most of our cases because basically March, April, May, all the venues that we supply from, well, Townsville pretty much down to Tassie were closed. So it was a pretty tough time, but our industry is a little bit different in we can't mothball it. We still have to continue winemaking. We still have to continue vineyards. So of course we had to continue pruning through winter, and that was a little bit tougher. Obviously cash flow was very low. But come July, August, things started to waken up a bit, and the last couple of months have been fairly good, actually. You know, it seems as though a lot of venues are coming back on. We're also getting a lot of support through our web sales, which has been terrific. So that's helped a lot.
And did you use this lockdown period to do anything different? I noticed that the labels, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the labels have all changed. Your old design with the red and the blue and the different logos seems to have all been refreshed. Yes. Was that something that happened, or was that something in the plan, and we're seeing it now?
No, that actually was planned before the lockdown, and we were rolling that out pre-lockdown. So no, the old label disappeared probably nearly 12 months ago now. So it's that's already happened. Yeah. But we did take some opportunity in the lockdown to do a bit more work in the vineyards, so that enabled us to, move on a little bit there, sort out a few blocks that needed a bit of renovation. But we've got a new website, and that's certainly one of the things that we have done in the last few months. So that's probably the biggest change you'd see.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what do you think is the industry perception from a consumer's perspective? Is some confidence returning? Are you seeing some cellar door visitation levels going up, or what's happening down in Tas?
Well, Tassie's pretty much open to most of Australia now, so we are seeing quite a lot of tourists coming in. Everybody's just keen to get about, and I think Tassie's also regarded as a fairly safe sort of area. We're always seen as being at the bottom of the world, and things come here last of all, so it's probably the safest place to be. And of course, it's one of the most beautiful parts of Australia, if not the most beautiful part of Australia. So, yeah, no, we've got people coming down, but there's a lot of the local venues are finding that even our local population is being very, very supportive. We're a very small community down here, and I think the lockdowns really impressed on people the importance of supporting your local businesses. And we've noticed that. We've seen people ordering out of their normal pattern. They were buying wines that they don't normally buy, regular purchases. And we took that as I guess, as a sign that they were really supporting us more than anything.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the results from the last 2 weeks. Great result. This Pinot is something special. What can you tell us about? Was there anything specific about the 2017 vintage that you can remember that maybe set it apart from previous vintages of this beautiful wine? Yeah, we want to try and tell as many people about this beautiful wine as we can. So what can you tell us? I'm just going to pop the bottle up on the screen for people watching this at home. Here we go. There she is.
Yep. Yeah, 17 vintage was, strangely enough, a fairly unremarkable vintage in terms of no extremes of climate. We didn't have any extreme wind. The set level was very average. It was what I'd call a fairly pedestrian vintage in a lot of ways. Some years we have a lot of heat, even down here in Tassie. It does get hot, you know, and we can get very hot wind at the same time. We can also get very cold vintages. We can have vintages where summer appears for maybe 3 weeks and then kind of drops away. But 17 was just one of those quiet pedestrian vintages. The vines weren't under very much stress. They were able to work pretty hard. The canopy was good. They didn't want for anything. There was no severe water shortage. So even though the wine is fabulous, it wasn't a vintage that really sticks in one's mind as being particularly outstanding from a meteorological point of view. But obviously the vines are the best indicator, and they're telling us that in fact they were very happy through the whole vintage. And I think that's the important thing, is that whole season you don't have any checks in the season. So sometimes you might get a very good vintage, but part of that season has had a little bit of stress. So you might have had 2 weeks of extreme heat, might have had a couple of weeks of very severe wind, but that to my memory didn't happen in the 17 vintage.
And while we're talking about climatic conditions and the impact, was Bream Creek affected at all with the smoke in the Huon Valley, the smoke issues?
No, we were very, very fortunate that vintage in that we didn't get any smoke across the vineyard. And even in the great fires of 2013, the Dunalley bushfire, we were very, very fortunate that the wind changed about 5 minutes before the fire arrived at our gate, and luckily sent it down the side of the vineyard and off, unfortunately, to Dunalley, and the smoke went with it. So we saw no smoke in that vintage either. So far, touch wood, we've been very, very fortunate. We have got a lot of farmland around us, which helps. So forest is a little bit further away from us.
And so in preparation for our chat this morning, I extracted, and I've already emailed this across to you, the judge's commentary. I'm just going to put the wine back up on the screen. So the one thing that we are doing and really pushing is feedback back to the industry. So I don't have the judges' names, and I'll probably keep it that way, but this wine was described during the judging as having a lovely nose, red florals, rhubarb, raspberries. It's lithe and fresh, balanced, integrated oak, beautiful acidity. It's a terrific Pinot. That was one judge. They were very happy with the wine. Next judge said it was pretty floral, cranberry nose, medicinal hints, menthol, chalky tannins. And the third judge described it as having cool fruits, cherry, cola, dark spicy notes, silky, finely structured palate, length is balanced and fresh, a very stylish wine. So there you go, more ammunition. What a beautiful wine. But Fred, can you tell us a little bit about your personal story and your journey in wine thus far? You've got a significant career in the Tasmanian wine industry. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing.
Well, I initially joined the Department of Primary Industry in Tasmania in 1974. And one of my early jobs was actually looking after a 1 acre experimental block the Department of Primary Industry had set up. And that contained around about 80 different varieties. 20 of those varieties were strange things. There were some labruscas there for looking at maybe grape juice potential, etc. But of course, we had all the major varieties, and including a lot of strange varieties that obviously went nowhere in the future. So I spent some time doing that, and I slowly became more involved with the developing wine industry. So I spent quite a lot of time with Pires, Wiltshire, Al Corso, and a number of others, Jeff Bull on the East Coast. And we were all trying to work out, first of all, how to grow vines in Tasmania. And then the second thing was, how do we get them to crop? And then the third thing became, how do we actually get good quality fruit, and what's involved in this? Interestingly, Tasmania was, and still is, so different to the mainland areas. And of course, the varieties that we needed to look at down here were vastly different. But Cabernet Sauvignon was actually the most planted variety in Tasmania for a long time, probably 15 or 20 years, which is probably hard to believe. But we soon learned that Cabernet in cool climate is fairly demanding, and you've got to be very, very careful about site selection and the way that you actually deal with the fruit in the vineyard. Now, the industry started to pick up pace around about 1980, the early 80s. We set up the Tasmanian Appellation of Origin system because there was some substitution of wines being touted as Tasmanian. So we had to protect the state brand by putting an appellation system in place. I mean, that's been superseded by the National Label Integrity Program, which is much the same sort of thing. So it was a fully audited program. During that time, of course, we started to look at different trellis systems, different sites. We were learning all the time about the seasonal variations, how to try and get quality, which clones were going to be suitable. Then in 1985, the industry had attracted enough attention from government that I was actually appointed as the state's first viticulturalist. And then in 89, I left the department because unfortunately, Department of Primary Industry was going to outsource to the new businesses that were giving agricultural advice. And we didn't want to be seen to be standing in the way of that private enterprise. I was told I was going to go into head office and do paperwork, which wasn't going to suit me. So I tendered my resignation and took up a job with Marilla. And I was there for about, I think it was 2.5, 3 years. Now, during that time, Bream Creek was actually owned and managed by Marilla, well, part owned by Marilla. There was a group of about 14 shareholders, and Marilla was the managing shareholder. So, of course, I became familiar with Bream Creek Vineyard. It was part of my role to oversee that operation. And those days were challenging because Bream Creek was pretty much 60% Bordeaux varieties, a smattering of Pinot, a bit of Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, a whole lot of unusual varieties. Cabernet was not suited to that site, and that became patently obvious. The trellis system that had been installed there at the time was also not appropriate. It was very hard to work in. So as we started to look at building the state's first cellar door restaurant at Marilla, then the Marilla group decided to sell their shares in the Bream Creek partnership. And as a result, the other shareholders decided that they should all sell out because, of course, Marilla was making the wine, managing the site and so on. Anyway, it went to auction and it didn't sell. I recognised some of the bidders as employees of the auctioneer's business. They were travellers, people doing sheep and cattle up the East Coast and things like that, and they were putting in bids. And so I actually went up to the auctioneer and I said, Jim, you didn't get a really serious bid, did you? And he sort of said, well, no, there was so-and-so and so-and-so. I said, I know these people, Jim. And so I wrote an offer out on the back of an envelope, and I said, take it into the owners' meeting. They'll meet after the auction as is custom. And from there, we negotiated a sale, and I purchased in 1990. Wow. And then one of my first jobs was actually to set about taking out about half the vineyard to remove the Cabernet, Merlot, and unfortunately removing Gewürztraminer, which is one of my favourite varieties, but it's really difficult to grow in our climate. Fabulous fruit, but economically very, very hard. And so we took those out, and of course replanted with Pinot, Chardonnay, and also added the unusual German variety called Schönberger. Yep. So the vineyard completely changed, and its profile, its varietal mix, the trellis system, lifted the irrigation system. Yeah, made some basic changes like that.
And so you've also had a bit to do with Stefano Lubiana between 1993 and 2002. What were you doing there? Were you just assisting or helping consult? What was that role?
Well, Steve Monique approached me when they first came into Tassie looking for a site to move over here. So we had quite a few discussions about Tasmanian viticulture, about sites that might be suitable. I went and had a look at their site up at Granton, where they are now, which is a very, very good site. Steve ended up, when I left Marilla, Steve ended up being our winemaker for, I think it must have been about 10 years probably. So we spent a lot of time together, and they were exciting days. He was setting up his winery. We needed a place to make wine. So Steve was our winemaker during that time, and we learned a lot together. And one of the things we learned is that if you don't fix Cabernet in flavour profile in the vineyard, it doesn't matter what you do in the winery. It's not fixable. We even tried keeping some bottles at 30 degrees C in a constant temperature for something like 3 months, and thought, I wonder if this will actually sort of change into something nicer. It didn't. So, and then the penny dropped with Cabernet, and I think it was the early 2000s, our 2005 Cabernet. We learned the lesson that you have to drastically change how you deal with things in the vineyard. In those days, while I was renovating Bream Creek, I purchased a block up at Rowella on the Tamar, and we had Cabernet and Merlot up there, as well as Pinot and Chardonnay. And I started playing around with the Cabernet up there. And I must say, James Halliday actually congratulated us and said, I've always given you a hard time about growing Bordeaux in Tasmania, Fred, but your 05 Cabernet is absolutely terrific. And it'll go on my list of the best Australian Cabernets. And it wasn't anything we did in the winery. It was purely viticulture. And we grow Cabernet outside.
Yeah. Okay, so you still got that. Okay. Very good. And talk us through the vineyard history. I'm just going to pop up a shot of the vineyard that we've got here. Beautiful shot of the vineyard. Can you tell us a little bit about the vineyard's history, Fred?
Yeah, the vineyard was first planted in 1974. And I think one of its main attributes in those days was that with viticulture, we were all very, very concerned about frost risk. And of course, this is a frost-free site. In fact, we're more likely to get the odd little bit of snow every 3 years than we are to get a frost. And that has occasionally happened. Tassie gets these little flurries that go through every few years. So the site was originally planted in 74. And then in 1990, as I say, I purchased the site. We set about taking out Cabernets from there and replacing them with Pinot. So we changed the trellis system, changed the irrigation system. You'll notice in the top of that photograph, you would have seen the trellis system that we call the Lyre, L-Y-R-E trellis system, which was developed in France quite some time ago. Now, it's a system that's not as easy to manipulate, and it's a little bit more labour intensive, but it was established at a time when labour was a lot cheaper and we could afford labour in the vineyards. There weren't any little smart machines that did things like leaf plucking, et cetera, and trimmers. This was all pretty much done by hand, certainly in Tasmania. And of course, it was the early days of bird netting. And so we were trying to cover as much vineyard under net as we possibly could, because the nets were expensive. There were no fancy net applicators. So we actually made one that sat on top of the roll frame of the tractor. And we had a lot of bird pressure down there, a lot of white-eye pressure. And white-eyes are the worst birds you can have. They are small, they are persistent, they have no fear of, dare I say, death or anything else. And so netting became a critical part of the component. And one of the easiest and cheapest ways to do that was to use the lyre system to run around about 30% more vineyard area under each hectare. But a lyre system's not one we would put in now. Nobody's put a lyre system in for probably 15 or 20 years. Although I would add that Home Hill have also had the lyre system and still have, and have done very well with that, as you know.
Absolutely. I remember when I was with Terry last year, he was telling me the unique features of the Home Hill vineyard, and the vines run a different way as to most. I can't remember what he was exactly saying, but I think they ran east-west as opposed to north-south, or I might have it the wrong way around. And he was saying everyone told him it's a bad idea, and well, the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the road direction in Tasmania is, and Tassie being a hilly site and getting cold wind, is generally driven by the site rather than, being able to get north-south direction all the time. I mean, north-south is preferred, but you've really got to work with the country. You've got to work with the wind, the lay of the land, the slope, the air drainage, and so on. So, yes, Terry's does run east-west, and our system at Bream Creek, that runs pretty much east-northeast, from that direction. So it's not a north-south by any means. We've actually got 2 blocks that run north-south, but that's only because we have a slope that enables us to do that in the middle of the vineyard. But the rest of the vineyard is pretty much almost east-west.
And there's a historical component to the location that you live in. I'm just going to pop up a map of Tassie here. So Bream Creek sitting out on the right-hand side of that screen with the yellow pin. And then if we zoom in on that, there's Marion Bay and Bream Creek Vineyard. Tell us a little bit about the history of this area, Fred.
Well, it's in Tassie history terms, it's quite significant. In fact, in Australian history terms, because in 1642, Abel Tasman landed on the rocky shore around about 2 kilometres south of Bream Creek Vineyard, and the carpenter apparently swam ashore with a Dutch flag wrapped around his waist and nailed the flag to one of the trees there. They were a little bit alarmed because they could see these notches cut in the trees that were around about 4 or 5 feet apart, apparently, and they thought, in fact, that the land was inhabited by some people of enormous stature, so they didn't hang around very long. It was also a very exposed coastline, and for a sailing ship, and I'm a sailor and I know what that coast is like, for a sailing ship, it's pretty scary. You don't want to be caught out there in the wrong weather, and particularly the old sailing ships. They didn't sail to windward like we can on a modern yacht, and they would have turned into driftwood. So they also picked up water there. So that was the first landing in Tasmania by a white person.
That's significant. Let's talk about the estate Pinot. So of the 6 entries, this is the other Pinot, which picked up a bronze medal. But can you tell us a little bit about the differences between the reserve and the estate in the production or in the growing? Is there a major difference?
The clonal mix is very much the same, and the growing conditions are obviously pretty much the same. But one of the big differences, I think, is that we do a lot of bunch thinning and bunch selection. We also do a lot of leaf plucking, very, very selective leaf plucking. And up until now, our leaf plucking has all been done by hand. So we are very, very, very selective about how we do that. And because we have a lot of vineyard on the lyre system, it is very important to get the leaf plucking correct. If you don't, you can end up with the wrong flavour profile. And unfortunately, flavour is everything in Pinot Noir, as far as I'm concerned. We also have a range of clones. So we have a number of blocks that have different clones in them. And as a result, we have the ability to mix and match our fruit. And that gives us the opportunity to make Pinots at different levels. crop load in Tasmania can be quite high in good seasons. It can also be very low. So we have the extremes. But the important thing is that the crop load has got to be matched with the vine capacity. And when I say vine capacity, I mean vine capacity not only by the age and the viticultural capacity, but also the capacity of the site in that season to ripen properly. And that means what other weather conditions are like. Is it a cool season? Is it a warm season? Is it a season we're getting a lot of sea breeze, or are we getting a lot of nor'westerly? Is it a season we're getting a lot of hot wind? Are the vines under stress, and so on? And so to me, it's all about reading those things. I guess I'm very old-fashioned in that way. I'm not very IT literate, as you've discovered in the setup. But to me, you've got to have a feel for the vines. You've got to be able to walk through those vineyards. You've got to be able to feel those leaves and get to be able to communicate almost with the vine and say, yep, you're happy. No, you're unhappy. I've got to fix it. And so we tend to do that. Now, in some seasons, some blocks perform better than others. And I think a lot of that is to do with the prevailing weather. So you'll find sometimes a block on a slightly more southerly slope will perform better in terms of quality. And in the warmer, hotter seasons, that'll certainly happen. And in the cooler blocks, you retain a lot more of those very delicate flavour compounds. Whereas in a cool season, for reserves, we'll head to one of the warmer blocks to make sure that we get the balance and that the acidity is not too high. And of course, we regulate acidity a lot by leaf plucking too. And that's something you've got to be watching all the time. It's down here, our climate changes. Everybody says our climate changes with every hill. And that's exactly right. And it changes across the vineyards here. So we don't have the huge broad spaces you see in a lot of the mainland areas where there's, I guess, a homogeneity of soil type, site, weather conditions, and so on. You can have massive changes here within 2 or 3 kilometres. And that's why each site's got to be looked after and each block's got to be looked after pretty much individually if you want to get the best out of the site. Now, I'm not saying you still can't grow great fruit, but if you really want to test the limits, you've got to put the work in.
And so with the leaf plucking regime, does that open up susceptibility to sunburn or sun damage?
We're very careful about that. And we start our leaf plucking program by only plucking the morning side and only very, very lightly. Then as the season progresses, we'll then take a bit more leaf off that morning side. And then if the season is remaining cool, we may take a little bit of leaf off the sunny side. The morning side is the side where the fruit is cool most of the day because the fruit is cool from the night before, and even in summer, Tassie nights are cool, which is rather nice. So the fruit is cool in the mornings, the sun is weaker in the mornings, and there's more humidity normally in the air, so the sun has a little bit less punch. As the day goes on, of course, humidity drops, the temperature of the whole environment is warmed up, so that means the berries are much warmer by the time you get to the afternoon. And so we are very, very cautious about plucking afternoon side. We don't want to get those cooked characters. We just want to avoid those as much as we can.
I was down at Coolangatta Estate last week in the Shoalhaven, just 3 hours south of Sydney, and I went to see Coolangatta Estate. And Greg Bishop, who's the pretty much the same as yourself, he doesn't make the wine on site, but he's the viticultural genie over there. He was saying they have quite an aggressive leaf plucking regime where they want to expose the bunches, and he said it's very uncommon what they do, and the boys up in the Hunter can't believe that the boys in the Shoalhaven do that. But Greg has some sort of formula, and his Semillons are amazing as well. So he's really worked out what works where, how, and to what degree, and off they go. So it's very interesting listening to the differences.
Well, yeah, certainly with something like Semillon, I mean, we leaf pluck Cabernet and Merlot very, very hard, really hard, and the sunny side and the afternoon side. You know, both sides we pluck very hard, and we do it very early. And our the Cabernet's actually done well. I mean, my colleague Rafe wanted to send some of our Cabernets into some of the shows in Europe, you know, in Berlin, Vienna, and so on, and I sort of said, I think we're on a hiding there, Rafe. I'm not sure that I'd do that. Anyway, he did send them, and they've come back with gold medals, so that they've stood up very well. And really, I have to say that that's largely happened because we have been plucking those hard to try and get the temperature of the berries up and to pick up the flavours that are appropriate for that variety. And so it depends on the variety. I mean, we've planted some Shiraz down here. We've planted just over a hectare of Shiraz now, not at Bream Creek, but in another block we have. And I can see us doing a lot of leaf plucking in there. But I've got to learn how to grow Shiraz yet.
So, Fred, Tasmania and Pinot Noir, Riesling, Sparkling and Chardonnay, there seems to be some sort of a correlation there. But do you think it's anchored in these varieties, or are we starting to see expansion out of there? I mean, you mentioned the German variety, Schomburger, and you've mentioned Cabernet and Shiraz, but are those the stable brands that Tassie's building its reputation on these days, or not?
Well, certainly Sparkling, Pinot, Chardonnay and Riesling, they are terrific in Tas in a whole range of sites. But I think we have enormous amount of potential with Shiraz in the warmer sites and also Cabernets and Merlots. And keep in mind that a Shiraz from Tassie actually won the Jimmy Watson Memorial Trophy some years ago, which I think was a bit of a shock to the Australian wine scene, that a Tasmanian would win the Jimmy Watson for a start. And secondly, that it wasn't a Pinot, it was actually a Shiraz. I think was jaw-dropping. And and to me, that just shows the potential here. And of course, the Tasmanian Pinot has won the Jimmy Watson since. And I can see a lot of expansion into some of the Bordeaux styles and the Rhones. And that's coming. I think that's the generation behind me will see that happening. And I think it's got a lot of potential.
The basis for that question was what I've noticed in the show, in the Boutique Wine Show, is we've set up new categories for things like Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Italian red varieties and other red varieties. And they are having massive entries coming through, and you're seeing a gamut of styles and different wines. And then when you look at the climate changes over on the mainland, the word that I'm hearing is we're looking for alternate varieties. We're looking for other things that are suited to this climatic patch or that climatic zone. Is any of that happening in Tassie, or is it going cooler styles?
We're generally still sticking with cooler styles. I mean, there's Tempranillo and there are, a range of Spanish varieties being quietly looked at here, but not with the same vigor as is happening in the mainland areas. We have certainly climate change effects happening here. There's no doubt about that. And the East Australian current off the east coast of Tasmania is one of the fastest warming ocean currents in the world. And we've certainly seen the effect at Bream Creek, where we're now picking Riesling. In fact, from that 1974 block, the trellis system is the same. It is certainly not an OH&S trellis system. It's planted so close to the ground because in those days, people thought you needed to be close to the ground to get the heat. And I've decided that for posterity, we should leave it as it is, much to, I think, the annoyance of some of our crew who are a bit taller than me. But it's like the canary in the coal mine, and we're picking that block now around about 3 weeks earlier than we were picking it in the late 70s. And it's the same clone, it's the same old trellis system, same vines and so on. And Riesling to me is the one in Tasmania that has really shown the effect of climate change. I know that some growers have said to me on the mainland and some of the areas over there that they realise that it's now starting to get too hot to grow classy Shiraz, and that they're now looking at Spanish varieties. And of course, they're doing that ahead of the run because they have to build a market for those Spanish varieties and the alternates when they really do have to start moving out of Shiraz and some other varieties because it has become far too hot. So they need to make sure they've got a continuity in their business, and that means you've got to have a continuity of market and a continuity of customers. So you've got to introduce people to the new varieties that are going to become appropriate for those warming areas. And the same's happening in Tassie, where we're now starting to look at, as I say, Shiraz and Cabernet's becoming. I'm not saying people are planting Cabernet here, they're planting more Shiraz, but Cabernet certainly, I think, being noticed a lot more by people here, and Merlots. And I think they're just getting better and better as the climate warms, becoming more appropriate to the site.
And do you think the flavor profile of Riesling has changed over these years with the climatic changes? Or is
Yes,
it just earlier?
no, the Riesling has changed a lot, particularly the degree of acidity, the freshness of Riesling. Most of us that are growing Riesling are working pretty hard to retain that. And when we were talking about leaf plucking earlier, Riesling is one that we are very, very careful about leaf plucking. I love Rieslings, and I love Riesling with a backbone. And we have that potential down here to have that beautiful acidic backbone and to really carry flavour. Acid and flavour, I think, are closely linked. So we're very, very careful about making sure that we don't overcook fruit. So Riesling, we tend to put in quite cool areas. At Bream Creek, it's on a very cool slope. In fact, we've got a lot on what's really a south-southeast slope, which many years ago we used to almost celebrate if we picked the Riesling down there before the 1st of June. And I think the latest vintage I can remember, we picked the Riesling down there on something like the 6th of June, and we were pruning Pinot at the other end of the vineyard. So, but those days have gone, and now that very southerly slope is really, really good for us because we're retaining a lot of that natural, pristine acidity that gives the wine a backbone and character. And if we want to alter that, we can alter that with a little bit of leaf plucking in a cool season and pluck the cooler side.
There you go. This is very interesting. I'm learning a lot. There's a hell of a lot happens in the vineyard. And we always knew that, but I didn't know or didn't realize it was to this level, flavor profile by slight adjustment of this and that. Very interesting. Fred, can you tell us a little bit about this beautiful wine? Where is she? There she is. Your Cuvée 2014. Tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, look, sparkling is very, very much at home in Tasmania. And Ed Carr, came down here many years ago in the late 80s, early 90s, and was looking very hard at Tasmania and sparkling, and obviously has done very well. And again, it's Pinot and Chardonnay are varieties that are handled well and obviously not leaf plucked, produce absolutely stunning sparkling wines. We leave ours on lees for an extended period. I'm a little bit old fashioned in my wines, I think, in that I much prefer to see extended winemaking, as I call it, longer on lees, longer in bottle before release, and so on. I think when we're in a cooler climate as we are, that we need to run those times. Our wines tend to develop slowly in bottle, and as a result, the winemaking process and the time of release process has got to be sympathetic to that, in my book. I hate to be in a position if we ever had to, rush out a release. I just don't think that you're going to see the best of the wine. There's still going to be great wines, but that can be even better if you leave a little bit of that time. So we're very careful where we get the Pinot and Chardonnay for our cuvee. It comes off our coolest blocks. So, for example, in that one, the Pinot Noir came off a south-southeast facing slope at Bream Creek. And that's a very cold slope. We'd be picking, table Pinots before almost we pick that sparkling Pinot. That's how far behind. And that table Pinot would be coming from a block that's probably only about 30 metres away, but a completely different slope. There's a ridge that runs down through the centre of Bream Creek. And on the left-hand side, you've got a north-facing slope, and on the right-hand side, a south-facing slope. And they perform completely differently, even though the soil type is very, very similar. And it's all about, this climate effect and the heat of the berries, the stress and that on the canopy. It's to do with the interaction with the topography, basically.
What is the breakdown of Chard to Pinot in that cuvee?
That one from memory is around about 60% Pinot, 40% Chardonnay. It might actually be 55-45. And we're slowly moving more to a slightly Chardonnay dominant. I'd like to get to a stage where we maybe reverse that and we end up being around about 55-60 Chard and then the minority Pinot.
Right. And obviously there's no Pinot Meunier at all.
No, regrettably. have Meunier in our plantings, and it might be something to address.
So if is 2014 the current release?
Yes,
that's the current vintage of that one. So where does the wine sit? Does the wine sit on site while it's in bottle before you release it, or does it sit offsite? Have you got an offsite storage location for it?
No, it sits
for maturation wise.
Yeah, maturation wise, sits on site. Yeah,
on site. Okay, all right. Okay, because I was just thinking that that's quite a bit of stock. If 2014 is your current vintage and your current release to the market, you'll have a 15, 16, 17, 18, and a 19 somewhere.
That's why it's an expensive production, yes. But again, I think if one's going to go to the trouble of making really good sparkling, then it needs time, and that's one of the reasons I want to move to a slightly more Chardonnay dominant, because I think the Chardonnay component reacts better with that aging profile.
Let's talk about the other two wines. We've got the Estate Riesling 2018, and we've also got the Reserve Old Vine Riesling, which picked up silver. What's is there any major difference between these two, or they're same clones? Again, it's just a site-specific wine. Tell us a little bit about these two.
There's a difference in clone mix in that the Old Vine Riesling is picked purely from that 1974 planted site I was mentioned earlier, with a very south-facing slope and very old vines. Those vines have got enormous trunks on them now. The yield from there is moderately low. They're very wide-spaced. The clone for that block is, we believe it came from Wynn's in South Australia. David Wynn had some involvement in Bream Creek in the early days, in the early 1970s, and he apparently introduced that clone down here. And that block is, I believe, 100% what we call Wynn's clone. The Estate Riesling comes from a mixture of clones, and they're from a much warmer sites, obviously. And the mix of clones there, 0011, 0012, and there's a couple of other smaller clones in there. I can't tell you the exact clonal mix. It's kind of lost in the mist of time now. And when one was struggling to stay afloat in a wine business in Tasmania in those early days, when we were taking ridiculous risks, quite frankly, the paperwork didn't always get completely kept aside. It's probably in a filing cabinet somewhere, but I can't remember now. But I know 0011 and 0012 were two that I rather liked.
Fantastic. Tell us, can you share any of your future plans with Bream Creek? Have you got any future plans that you can tell us about? Any expansion plans? Any digital plans? Any cellar door plans? What can you tell us?
Well, it's funny you should mention cellar door. We've had people ringing us up for years now saying, "Are you open? What time do you close? Can we come down? If we come in, can we taste this and that, etc., etc." And up until now, we haven't had a cellar door, although we have a spectacular site, as you've showed in the photograph. So we finally have council approval to build cellar door. We're going through the process, the technical processes now, of civil engineers and structural engineers who need to provide all their certificates so that we can go to tender. So hopefully in about 12 months' time, you'll actually be able to come down and visit us on site, taste some great wines, and overlook Marion Bay, Maria Island, Tasman Sea, and be able to almost see the spot where Tasman landed, in fact.
I'll definitely be there. How far away are you from Freycinet, roughly, by car?
In driving time, probably 50, 60 minutes. Yeah.
So I can go to that little... I just want to know if I can go to that oyster farm that's right on the beach and get my oyster fetish handled, and then jump back in the car and come down. It's only 55 minutes or an hour. That's fine. Absolutely.
Well, we've got oysters only 5 minutes away in Dun Alley. Some fabulous oysters down there. Yeah.
Fred, can you tell us about your favourite wine memory? Not necessarily a Bream Creek memory, but what's your favourite wine memory that comes to mind?
I think one of my favourite wine memories is is actually a gentleman came in from the States, and I'm just trying to remember his name, many years ago. I must have been back in 82. I was with the department, and we had a whole lot. We had something like 80 different experimental wines to show him. I mean, when I look at it in modern day, we probably treated him appallingly. This gentleman was about 80 something. He'd come from the States, flown across to South America, done a contract there to look at some of their production methods as they were sort of lifting production and getting rolling. And Maynard Amarine, that's who it was, Maynard Amarine. And he was he came in. We got him off the plane. We were so excited. We dragged the poor guy straight into the labs, put him in front of all these glasses, and sitting around with our notebooks and pencils. And he tasted through these wines. He would have had no idea what was growing in Tasmania. And I was absolutely floored by what he was able to tell us about the wines. And I certainly remember him telling me about Cabernets in no uncertain terms, and that these were awful wines, and to either pull them out or do something about it. But he was also able to tell us about Chardonnay, Pinot, and so on. And some of those comments, I was staggered. And then he really floored me when we were struggling to keep glasses up to him. And so I had a couple of technical officers in the staff canteen that were trying to recircle glasses around. And then he pulled me aside and he said, "Fred, can you stop using the Irish linen tea towel?" And I thought, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I think that really impressed on me the impact of, I guess, the fruit, the site selection, the viticulture on the quality of the wine. And he was telling us about this. And as I say, he'd just flown from South America. He must have been exhausted, and he was quite elderly, and he knew nothing about Tasmania. Tasmania wasn't even known in Australian wine circles back then. And he was able to tell us about that. And I thought, wow, you can get palates like that. And I was staggered. I was just stunned. And that really hooked me then. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's a great memory. Last question for you, Fred. And it's a topic that I'm quite interested in. I don't know why I'm interested in it, but I am. I'm increasingly finding that wine people believe that music has an impact upon buying patterns, like in the store or at the cellar door. And I also know several judges that I've worked with that they judge with earphones on to block out the noise, but it does something with their mindset. And same people also blend their wine and have it at the cellar door and have it in the back of house when they're working with the ferments. Tell us about your taste in music. What are you listening to at the moment?
I love classical music. I mean, I like a whole genre of music, but I generally listen to classical, particularly when I'm traveling in the car. And I find that I think better when I've got some classical music going. And when I'm traveling, I use that as an opportunity to think about, well, the block that I'm going to. Okay, how should we handle this? What are the problems I'm likely to find? I haven't been there for 4 or 5 days. Trying to think ahead. What's the next stage? Okay, we're coming up towards netting, so we've got to do some final adjustment in leaf plucking. Where is that block probably going to go into? Is it going to go into a sparkling? Is it going to be table? We've probably already decided that anyway, but I want to make sure it's appropriate. And I find listening to the classical music, it just gives me an opportunity to chill out. My mind kind of stops. If I don't listen to music when I'm traveling in the car, I tend to think a lot of negative things like, oh, how could that tractor tire have got a puncture in that block? There hasn't been a nail in there for 50 years, and it's found a nail. I'm going to have to get that tire off and get it up to be repaired, or, the irrigation system's blocked again. How could that have happened? Why hasn't the filter been cleaned, and so on? Whereas the classical music, I can just calm down and I can actually start to think, I think a lot more objectively, and I can understand why wine judges could be doing that. Absolutely.
Focus on the craft as opposed to focusing on the issues.
I thought you were going to ask me a completely different question. Were we playing music to the vines, and did that improve their performance?
No, I
And
wasn't going to ask you that, but I'll ask you that anyway. Tell us, do you do that?
well, we don't, but as part of my role in the Department of Primary Industry as a general horticulturalist initially, a lot of my clients were the state's glasshouse tomato producers. And I used to go around them in my rounds and I'd do their nutritional work and their pest and disease and so on. But if you went into their greenhouses in the morning, two things were happening. One was at precisely 10:30, they would be playing classical music to the tomatoes. And they swore and declared that they'd done trials on this and that it made a really big difference. The other thing was that they had what they called a money stick, which is like a little short piece of wood about, 60 centimetres long, like a little walking stick. And they would walk through the tomato houses and they would tap the wires to which the tomatoes were actually trained. And that was their money stick. Now, the idea of that was, I found out, had a very good reason, and that was it set up a vibration in the wires, which set up a vibration in the tomato vines when they were flowering, and so it helped the shedding of pollen. And the time when they shed the pollen, these were Dutch growers. They'd studied tomatoes as their main subject in Holland in their technical colleges. So they knew tomatoes inside out. And they knew that they'd be shedding pollen between 12 a.m. and early afternoon. So they would spend the morning with the classical music, walking through with a money stick, making sure that the crop was going to be a really good crop. So maybe music does have an impact on plants. I mean, I've seen some reviews that say so. Who knows?
Maybe that's something for your new cellar door. When you've got that going, you can get some classical music blasting out through the vines afterwards.
On the veranda, yeah.
Fred, I'm going to let you get on with your day. Thank you so much for making the time to have a chat with us and to tell us a bit about your beautiful part of the world. Congratulations on this amazing achievement from Bream Creek. I'm super excited that the trophy stays in Tassie and it stays with Tasmanian Pinot. It's a passion of mine, Tassie Pinots. And I mean, I love all wines equally, but I love others more, if you know what I mean. But we'll be in touch. Congratulations, and we look forward to being in touch with you when I get down to Tassie, hopefully in the next couple of months, once some of this world environmental situation calms down. And we will keep the ball rolling and keep the faith in Bream Creek. So thank you for your time.
Great talking to you. Great, thanks very much.
I'm just going to minimize you there, and I'm going to wrap it up. So give me one tick. All right, everyone, that's it for this first episode. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you learned something amazing about these beautiful wines from Tassie. Bream Creek is the wine that you want. Let's get that in front of you. Reserve 2017, but all of the Bream Creek wines, Rieslings, Sparklings, Sauv Blancs, they're all amazing. Check out their website at breamcreekvineyard.com.au or check out their socials on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, thanks for joining. We'll see you again soon. Cheers.